First of all, I have to excuse the presence here of the director of the Free Culture Foundation. He has told me to wish you a very good seminar. There are circumstances beyond very well that has not allowed him to be here with us, major circumstances. And but he says that taking into account the experience that we had last year and the program that we have prepared for today's day, we can continue the collaboration with our dear friends of ICMES. So on his behalf, welcome to Essaouira and welcome to this conference. Secondly, I would like to start with the thanking chapter, so to say. And I would like to thank the Asociación Essaouira Mogador. For us, they are more than friends, they are more than partners. It's a great pleasure for us to be here. This historic city with this ambience of tolerance, of understanding, we thought it was the best place to have a conference like this. So thank you very, very much to Kautar, thank you to Zined, thank you to Nora, thank you to all the friends that has made that possible. It's not easy to do one event like this when you're not home, but they have facilitated tremendously everything so that we can enjoy today our conference. Of course, to our President Delegate André Azoulay, we would like to send him special thanks because it was also his idea to be here and to enjoy the city, not only the conference and this association. Secondly, I would like also to thank deeply to our friends of ICMES. Second time that we are having a conference together. Last year it was for us it was a great pleasure and a great success to welcome them in Seville. This year we are here in Morocco, which is at Three Cultures, is our second house, and I would like to thank Norton for being here and the rest of our ICMES friends, wishing that we can continue to do seminars and conferences like that and talking about such important issues. Thirdly, I would like to thank also to the translators. I would like to thank them because we're talking to them. They all were facilities, and this kind of seminars is very important, the translation. I'm sure that we're going to speak softly, calm, so that can follow the translation. I'm pretty sure about that. And thank you for being so open, with all the last change that we had. I don't want to make it too long, but I'm going to say two words on my foundation. Three Cultures Foundation of the Mediterranean was born in the year 1998, for those that don't know. And it's a partnership between the Kingdom of Morocco and the Andalusian government of Spain. We have three major areas of work, which is the relation between Morocco and Andalusia, the largest Spain, the European Union, and the Middle East. That's why we are doing things related also to the Middle East and to Islam today. Our last name, the Mediterranean, is all the scope in which we work. We promote understanding, we promote tolerance, we promote that you need to know the other in order to be able to understand and co-live with him. That's what we've been doing for many years, and I hope we can also do it too. And I don't want to make it longer than that. Just thank again the Essaouira Mogador Association for letting us be here today. And I just want to you have the program here on the documentation of the Congress. So we will have a speech and a respondent. That's more or less the way we're going to do it. So right now I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Norton Netvinsky, President of ICMES. So, Norton, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Hall. On behalf of the International Council for Middle East Studies, my ICMES colleagues who are here, and myself, I want to thank the Three Cultures of the Mediterranean Foundation for their work in planning the conference, and to thank the Association Essaouira Mogador for its collaboration and for providing us with this wonderful place for the conference. As I am sure you are all aware, the term or concept modernity in regard to religion generally, especially when broadly defined, has been discussed and analyzed extensively for some time in a learned manner, and unfortunately at other times in unsophisticated ways. I am sure that our today's discussion of modernity and Islam will be both sophisticated and scholarly. I am looking forward to today's discussion. For some time, I have been interested in religion and modernity, admittedly, primarily for myself, but not exclusively, in regard to Judaism and modernity. That interest has prompted me to take the liberty of including in my brief introductory remarks a personal experience in provoking a discussion of Judaism and modernity. Recently, I mentioned this conference and the title thereof to two good friends, a Reform rabbi and an ultra-Orthodox rabbi. Both are learned and scholarly individuals. After telling them the title of this conference, Islam and Modernity, I asked my friends in separate conversations what they would answer if I asked each of them to speak about Judaism and modernity. In summary, the Reform rabbi maintained that the development of Reform Judaism, based upon constantly increasing knowledge with its adjustments of and changes imposed upon what is commonly referred to as traditional Judaism, has preserved the faith, or the true faith as he put it, for many Jews, and has made Judaism acceptable to large numbers of Jews who otherwise would have moved away from it. In summary, the ultra-Orthodox rabbi insisted that Judaism had never changed and would never change from the time of Moses, Sinai, and the covenant between God and the Jews. He argued further that the Torah given by God could only be understood correctly by study and acceptance of the oral and written tradition, as explained by the great Orthodox thinkers. This explanation of God's Word made Judaism, meant that it could not in essence be changed. And for him, attempts by Jews to change that tradition in order to try to be better assimilated into certain other cultures violated God and was sinful. The Orthodox rabbi continued, increased knowledge in certain areas of this life created no real conflict for Jews who believed in the consistency and unchanging nature of Orthodox Judaism. Reform Judaism from this perspective constituted an apostasy. For the ultra-Orthodox rabbi, therefore, Judaism and modernity amounted to a meaningless consideration. I wonder if this difference of opinion about Judaism and modernity is analogous in any way to Islam and modernity. Now, I also want to present, again very briefly, one additional comment in this introduction. In his thoughtful and persuasive, recently published new book, One Islam, Many Muslim Worlds, Raymond Baker made some important points that I believe should be included in a discussion of Islam and modernity. Baker argues that although the decline of the Islamic world, particularly in the Arab heartland, has in many ways made the current state of affairs for Muslims the worst in the 14 years of Islam, Islam has nevertheless emerged as a civilizational force strong enough to challenge the imposition of Western, particularly American, homogenizing power on Muslim peoples. There has been a modern Islamic awakening, a broad and diverse movement of Islamic renewal. Baker points out that Islam's unexpected strength in recent years does not originate from official political, economic, or religious institutions. Neither, he said, can it be explained by focusing on the criminal assertions of violent marginal groups which are rejected by the great majority of Muslims. The extremists acquire support from the hatred of failed Arab regimes and destructive Western policies in Islamic lands. The recent strength of the Islamic revival, it goes on, stems from the Islamic mainstream. The Islamic renewal is a contemporary Islamic midstream that emerged in complex and adaptive forms as the guiding force of the renewal. This midstream has become a presence everywhere Muslims are found, even though it does not unify all of the varying parts of the Islamic world or Ummah. This revival has played and is playing an important role everywhere Muslims are found, even in places where Muslims are a minority. This midstream emphasizes that all human understanding draws inspiration from sacred Islamic texts, no matter how unpersuasive or distorted particular interpretations of those texts may be. All have made contributions, for better or for worse, to the development of Islamic civilization at one time and place or another. This may be a lesson here for the subject of Islam and modernity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. We continue with the opening speech. The opening speech is going to be given by Dr. Emilio González Ferrin. Among other things, he's the director of Chair Al-Andalus in the Cultural Foundation of the Mediterranean. His conference is called Islam, Darb al-Islam, Islamicate, a plea for limits. And after that, there will be some comment by Mr. Norton Maglisi. Emilio, when you want.
شكرا جزيلا. صباح الخير. مؤسسة جامعية مغادور السويرة على ضيافتهم، على رحبهم باسمي وباسم مؤسسة الثقافات الثلاثة وجامعة إشبيلية. لما قمنا البارحة بجولة تفسحية في شاطئ ومدينة كل الشوارع السويرة، ذكرت أول مرة في المغرب طالما في سنة 1986 أنا قمت بدراسة اللغة العربية في مدينة تطوان، وما زال أذكر مفاجأة ألوان المغرب، مفاجأة ابتسامة الناس المغرب وطعامه اللذيذ. ومن اللازم أن أعترف اليوم أن هذه المفاجأة هي مستمرة، لأن اليوم أنا أشارك معكم أن هذه المفاجأة مستمرة حتى اليوم. أنا اليوم أحس نفس المفاجأة. وشكرا جزيلا على هذا الاستقبال وهذه الضيافة. وبالنسبة لأصدقائنا من الولايات المتحدة، هناك مثل عربي مشهور ومعروف جدا يقول كميالي: اسأل عن الجار قبل الدار وعن الرفيق قبل الطريق. ومعكم أي مؤتمر وأي سفر هو حفلة. وشكرا جزيلا. To continue in English, may I jump to English directly? I mean, المترجم مستعد. Okay, so today I'd like to share with you some thoughts about the subject that brought us together. How can I reduce this? Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Inshallah, the name of the speech, a very short one, is going to be Islam Dar al-Islam, Islamic Aid, a plea for living, as my good friend German told you before. But first of all, I'd like to share with you some experience, a private, a personal experience that happened to me when I was traveling to Vancouver. I've been visiting professor in the Vancouver School of Theology. Some of you, I guess, you know this anecdote, but I'd like to share this with you because it gives an exact impression of what may mean for an Spaniard to talk about Islam. When I went to Vancouver after a very complicated combination of short travels from Seville to Madrid, Paris, Utah, because there was some stormy weather in New York. So, and at the very end, I arrived at the airport of Vancouver, and the policeman in the police station at the airport saw my passport, and I didn't realize how many Arab stamps and Islamic stamps could I have in my passport after these years traveling. So that man, I saw him astonishing, I saw him opening his eyes and said, "Oh, you've got a stamp from Pakistan. Oh, you have several stamps from Iran, from Egypt. Oh, you have a lot of stamps from Morocco." So from Vancouver, for that man, that policeman, in this time, this is a genuine surprise. So he told me, "So why all these stamps?" And I told him, "Well, I have this contract. I am a visiting professor." Of course, I was bringing my contract with me just in case. And he told me, "Oh, I can understand all these stamps because you specialize on Islamic studies. I guess you need to travel there. But look, why do you have so many stamps from Morocco? Why do you have so many stamps entering one morning and the round trip that very same day or the following one?" And I told him, well, he was there with his computer, and I told him, do you have Google Maps in your computer? And I searched for this picture. And I told him, you know, this is Morocco, and this is Spain. This is where I spend all my weekends. And the last thing I do every single night when I close my windows is to watch the coastal line of Morocco and all the lights of the city of Tangiers. So I realized there how close we are physically. But just imagine if I specialize on Islamic studies, on Andalusian studies, you can imagine the second dimension of this. How close is Islam from my own culture? Not only physically, but also culturally. And you can imagine how close is Islam when every single day the breaking news bring us some ideas about Islam. So history, geography, and media are offering a certain idea about Islam. Well, for me, this is based on stereotypes. We can't speak freely about Islam avoiding those stereotypes. We follow this path, and I'd like to share with you some reflections about this. First of all, I'm afraid that facts are nowadays pointing to the idea of Islam as a bloc, as a totalitarian, political, social, religious, unique system. I don't know, perhaps Isam knows him. I don't know if you know this book by Philip Hitti, a very old one. This celebrated book, Islam, A Way of Life, has been a cornerstone into this monolithic interpretation since he formulated it in the early 50s, I think, 50s or 60s. The Spanish translations date back to the 70s. I think this consideration of Islam as a way of life is a real social and international disease shared by both Western and Muslim scholars. A consideration that may lead Islam to move from religious system to ideology, and from this ideology to social system in most of contemporary interpretations of the relationship between Islam and modernity. That is to say, the very fact of separating Islam and modernity as two different entities or elements of comparison may force us to assume their sudden confrontation, or at least the mutual depiction as confronted otherness. Is it working, the translation? I can go slowly. To me, the expression Islam and modernity denotes a previous misconception of the first term, Islam. Just like when, for instance, in Europe, we formulate expressions like European policy towards the Mediterranean, assuming that one thing is Europe and the other one is the Mediterranean, when, as a matter of fact, Europe is a Mediterranean creature, at least having in mind its cultural roots. Orientalism did create a certain sense of alien otherness regarding Islam, but this misconception between Islam and modernity doesn't come from a voluntarily Orientalistic approach, but from an overdose of meaning in a single word, Islam, that in fact may refer to three very different concepts. It is not, as it may seem, that Islam is three different things. It is rather that we mix three different Islams: a religious system, a civilization, and a contemporary self-defined social identity. It is therefore absolutely needed to separate these three Islams, just like some scholars have been trying to do since a very long time. The first attempt comes from Israeli scholar Shlomo Zev Goitein. Goitein justified the distinction between several Islams, in plural, by the common and habitual use of expressions like Islamic art, Islamic science, Islamic philosophy, expressions that refer to Islam disregarding any religious hue, as a complete civilization, never as a religion, as you may understand. For instance, architectural masterpieces as Saint Mary the White, the Synagogue of Toledo, or the Melke Church in central Spain, or the Alcázar in Seville. All these Spanish churches, Christian palaces and synagogues built under the pattern of Islamic art deserve a serious delimitation of what we may consider as Islamic, while separating it very clearly from any religious hue. For instance, and this is really curious, the Alcázar of Seville is a Christian palace. It was built under Pedro I and Peter I, and in the front gate of the Alcázar is written in Arabic, I am Butrus, I am Malik Butrus, I am Ismi Malik Butrus, because he perfectly knew, he was perfectly aware that the population of Seville was Arabic speaking, and he was a Christian king, and he built this palace. He started to build it in 1360. It means more than 1 century after the Castilian conquest of Seville. So he had 1 century to change this Arabization of Seville, but they didn't do it. Well, the funny thing is that the Alhambra of Granada was built after this palace, some years after this palace. So the pattern of the Alhambra as the stereotype of Islamic art in Spain is following the Islamic art of a Christian king. Well, but it was definitely, I mentioned Goitain about this Islamic conception of art, but it was definitely Marshall Hodgson who clearly marked the boundaries between these very different three Islams. His main input was the word Islamicate as an adjective alternative to Islamic while referring to civilization. An expression like Islamicate world or Islamicate contributions that could lastly make needed differences. Hodgson, a historian himself, defined Islamicate as something that, and I quote, would refer not directly to the religion, Islam itself, but to the social and cultural complex historically associated with Islam and the Muslims, both among Muslims themselves and even when found among non-Muslims. He's writing this in his masterpiece, The Adventure of Islam, 3 volumes talking about this distinction of the 3 Islams. Distinguishing the religious, that is, Islamic aspects of history from the non-Muslim cultural and scientific aspects of this history, as well as the roles played by non-Muslims who happen to be ruled by Muslims. Hodgson also emphasized continuities between Islamic civilization and the wider world, and therefore its connection with its time, its modernity. So the expression Islam and modernity is useless for Hodgson because Islam as a culture is the spirit of its time. Islam itself, Islamic civilization, is modern by definition because it's living its time. Briefly said, Islam is a religion. Islamic world refers to a civilization that took over Rome and developed itself geographically from Spain to India and China. That was never a unique state, and that lasted from the foundation of Baghdad around the year 800 to the 1920s, when Ottoman Turkey stepped back as Islamic global civilization, while Muslim India, for instance, and Iran nationalized different Muslim political projects. So, if they nationalize them, they simply cut off this connectivity between a global Islamic civilization. And as a third dimension, we have today Muslim societies with their own dynamics, including occasional and voluntary mixture of the 2 first Islams for political purposes and class struggle. In my view, I've never proposed the use of new terms. For me, it's too complicated to offer a new dimension of vocabulary about Islam to the public. It always means overloading the possibilities of comprehension. I'd rather settle for simply realizing the mere existence of different concepts. After that, the use of new terms come naturally. It was the philosopher Wittgenstein who said that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Now, the world is too narrow and tight due to the oversize of a word, Islam. And it was Lord Cromer who said in 1880s Egypt, he was the representative of the British colonialism in Egypt. He wrote this book, The Making of Modern Egypt, and he wrote inside, "Reform Islam is Islam no longer." And I may agree, as long as we maintain religion. But we can reform a society, as well as its relations with the religion. When Max Weber highlighted the interdependence between religious leadership and socio-economic relevance, he was pointing precisely not to a system of beliefs, but to the power of its managers. Clergymen never propose reforms voluntarily. They simply lose or gain social power. And when they pretend to implement reforms, they actually mean to lower their level of social demands, a compulsory process normally associated with survival maneuvers in healthy times. At the very end, a religion is what we create in its name. And so, religious totalitarianism, for instance, means no more than oversizing the clerical power, just like it happens with any other oversized ideology. To put this in connection with Hodgson's Islamicate, I hardly use the word Islamicate word, but I like very much the concept, and even the very reason of its coinage, to separate separable things. I also use it to separate a bit the three Islams I mentioned, religion, culture, contemporary societies, because I can't see an Islamic religious reason or cause in those long periods of time in which Islam, culture, civilization, never a unique political entity, as I said, was the dominant culture in a multi-confessional Mediterranean region and far beyond. But I don't do it as an apologist. I like to behave myself and tend to think as a cynical scholar or historian, but simply because, honestly, I can't see so much religion in history. Of course, I see it in contemporary narratives of history, but this is new. I myself was raised as an Islamicist under the powerful idea of history as ties of secular peoples and ideas, following, for instance, Maxine Robinson's book, Islam and Capitalism, of economic superstructures and so on. Personally, I find that it was the Muslim representatives of scientific positivism during the 19th century and after who started that atypical contemporary search for a unique and true Islam. This is a very interesting illustration. We can hardly read it from here, but the title is Le lion indissoluble al-Udka. Al-Udka was a very famous, celebrated journal created by some representatives of the class struggle between colonialism and between the Arab world and the colonial powers. Amongst them, it was a Muslim called Muhammad Abdul. He was a Sunni himself, also a Shi'i, Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, because he was Persian, but he pretended to be an Afghan just to let the people think that he was a Sunni. There was a Jewish, Jacob Sarnour. There was a Christian, Farah Hamdoun, and they all spoke in the name of the Islamic world. So, of course, it wasn't a question of religion. Coming back to the Islamic world, there is a journal, and some of my colleagues are already using this differentiation precisely in this journal. I like it very particularly. This journal, Intellectual History of the Islamic World, edited by my colleague Sabine Schnittke from the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton University, in its declaration of principle, they say, and I quote, "In the medieval, late medieval, and pre-modern world of Islam, Muslims, Jews, and Christians constituted a unique cultural and intellectual commonality." End of quote. And this is precisely what Shlomo Zed-Goitain was saying in his book about a Mediterranean society. The most important part of Goitain's book, A Mediterranean Society, is precisely this first A, because he thought, after studying and basing his book on the study of the Geniza of Cairo, the treasure, the documentary treasure of the Cairo synagogue, he found out that the history of this Jewish community was the history of the Mediterranean. They never presented themselves as self-considered social identity apart from Islam. In this book, it's said, in this collection of reviews, it said that they share, Muslims, Jews, and Christians, they share a language, Arabic. Yesterday we were talking precisely about the creation of this lingua franca of the Mediterranean, the Arabic. And at times they also share Persian and maybe sometimes Turkish, because the very concept of official language could switch from one to the other, which they spoke in daily life and which they also used for their theological, philosophical, legal, and scientific writings. That is to say, if you are a Jewish rabbi and you want to speak or to work about your own sense of theology in your own religion, you could do it. As Moshe ben Maimonides, you could do it perfectly in Arabic. They share, the same books, so that a continuous multidimensional exchange of ideas, texts, and forms of discourse was the norm rather than the exception. In my opinion, separating these three Islams may contribute to normalize the narrative projected by the third one, the contemporary Muslim societies that have created a certain history of self-alienation based in a perception of identities as distinct compartments. And I particularly like to show this to my students when I talk about these kind of things. We talk about collective identities. And we have this idea about our identity. This is the vertical and not horizontal projection of an identity. I mean, I tend to think, as they used to tell me, you are part of this identity. You are yellow, you are white, you are black, you are gray. I mean, stamped compartments. And I like particularly these two illustrations because using the same colors, we can project the picture of Mondrian or the picture of Jackson Pollock. In my opinion, these colors are a projection and a contemporary narratives of what we want to create, the idea of the world based on collective identities settled in the past. But the past is exactly this. It's only that when we order from today, we create this Mondrian version. When at the very end, the distinction of these three different Islams will ease the way to understand their respective normalization. I particularly like the idea of Islamic aid world because I specialize particularly in this. I mean, in the chair Al-Andalus, I have the honor of represent and direct the Tres Culturas Foundation. We always offer the idea of this Islamic aid world as the cradle, as the seed of the European Renaissance. And I don't know if you know this picture by Raphael. Raphael he depicted here the sense of Renaissance, the Renaissance as the renewal of the Greco-Latin world. And he depicted here Aristotle and Plato and all the philosophers and thinkers of the Greek academia. And amongst them, there's a certain person atypically considered in further depictions of this picture, this man encircled in red. And this man is Ibn Rushd. Ibn Rushd, Averroes, that he gave the name to the first trend of free thinking in Europe. The Averroism in French, was forbidden in the University of Paris in 1250 because of precisely this free thinking. So the idea we may have of what Islamic aid world did offer to Europe is not exactly the idea the vast majorities of Muslim communities in Europe have of themselves. And I like also this Giorgione's picture. Giorgione, in this picture, is depicting exactly the new world from the Renaissance point of view. It's a very interesting picture. We can see very clearly that the sun is going right now here. So the young man is facing at the new sun, at the new day, and he is writing. So he is studying, thinking on the future. The past, the recent past, is looking at us, and the old past. I mean, this man represents the old patriarchs of the Bible, but also the philosopher. Well, the representation of the medieval times are here in the figure of Ibn Rushd. That man is Ibn Rushd. For Giorgione, for the Renaissance, the Middle Ages are an Islamic time. I have a colleague, he passed away some years ago. He specialized on Islamic science, to use this word by Hudson. And he said that we have the impression of dark Middle Ages, but the Middle Ages wasn't dark. It's simply that it was written in Arabic and we don't understand it. So we should translate this idea, because we simply close the door. We depict in white, in black and white, the Middle Ages simply because we want to create a colorful depiction of the Renaissance. It's this history about contrasting. Well, in my opinion, as I told you, if we separate these three Islams, we could arrive to the point of limiting Islam, one, as simply one more religious system and not the spiritual reserve of the world. Two, Islamic culture and civilization as another component of our universal modernity, as we saw in Giorgione, in the Renaissance in general. And three, contemporary Muslim societies, in my opinion, highlighted and represented by this four persons, for instance, as the summing up of normal individuals. This lady is Aida Hacialik, a Dutch parliamentary. This lady is Sarah Khan, the CEO of Inspire, a very influential review in Great Britain. That man is the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and that man is a Canadian parliamentary. They behave collective self-identification as Muslim. And so I think this is the future of Islam and modernity, if we individualize this relationship. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Emilio. It was great listening to you. Now I think the opportunity to comment on your wonderful speech.
In terms of asking a few questions, but maybe you will answer. I was thinking as you were talking that if I were a devout Muslim, why would I not believe and even answer you by saying that your division into this separation of religion, civilization, and contemporary Muslim societies, that in reality there shouldn't be a separation, that is all one unit, and that's one unit that comes essentially, or one unit that has this essence of belief in the religion. But why could it not be simply one unit? And I'm thinking especially, to reiterate, why would not, or why would a devout Muslim not say that? And also, the devout Muslim could say that in regard to advances in this world, sociological advances, technological advances, other advances as well, that is not something separate for Muslims or for Islam, but that's part of this one whole. I'm thinking that, well, of course, from what I look at mostly, I'm thinking now of what that Orthodox rabbi stated about Judaism and about modernity, I'm not thinking so much a statement that modernity and Judaism, that term is meaningless, but I'm thinking that for him, there's no conflict whatsoever between these advances or between religion and an advanced civilization and contemporary social identities or contemporary Muslim societies, as you put. Well, that's the major question I would ask. Then also, I, of course, picked up when you said that at one point, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about what you said, but I think I got it. You know, religion is what we create. Now, I also wonder, what would a devout Muslim think about that? A devout Muslim might believe that, well, we advance our knowledge of what our religion is, but we didn't create that religion. God created that religion. So I'll leave my comment at that. There are some other questions, but those are, I would say, the two major questions I have from what you presented.
Well, yes, I think you're right. Perhaps I was projecting a too wide and personal idea about that separation, and it could sound as if I were denying the possibility of uniting the three. I'd like to bring two examples of the idea of my answer. The first one is about my brother. He likes very much football, and when he's watching a football game between Barcelona and Real Madrid, he says Barcelona is far more than a team. Barcelona is a way of life.
She's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, he's wrong because it is precisely Real Madrid, the way of life. No, I'm joking about this. The question is that, of course, he's mixing all these things. Well, I used to have some discussions with my father because he's a proud Spaniard, and for him there's no more than Spain. And sometimes when I think about the world, I think that I'm closer to the very concept of university than to the concept of nation, for instance. And I say sometimes, Daddy, when I hear Gaudeamus Igitur, the university anthem, I feel more close to this idea than to the idea of my own national anthem. So what I'm trying to say is that you can project an individual idea of what is a way of life, because it is your life, but you can't project a whole interpretation of the world based in your own ideas. And I think that my colleagues are offering an idea of an overwhelming Islam as concept. In Spanish, for instance, when we write Islam as religion, it goes with lower case, and as civilization in capital letters. This is a fine separation that does not exist in English, for instance. That's the first part is about this. The second part is an example, perhaps with a bit of provocation or scandal. I have a very good friend, the one who invited me to Vancouver. He's a rabbi, and he's gay, and he's married. He did marry 25 years ago, so he has a very familiar, how to say, gay consideration of the world. So to say, he's a rabbi, he's a believer. And when he came to visit us, he told me, "I'm going to Madrid. Where can I stay there?" And in my childish vision of the world, I told him, there is a very famous gay neighborhood in Madrid, Chueca. So all the gays of Madrid live there. And he told me, "Oh, that's very boring. I am gay enough. I don't need to be surrounded by so many gays." Well, this is my idea of the way of life. I like very much to be a Christian amongst so many Muslims when I was living here in Tunisia, and because religion is mine, so I don't need this social projection. And now they are creating the fiction that religion is not what you feel. Religion is your ID. And this goes to the second question about religion is what we create. Well, people that specialize on religious studies separate very clearly between religion, that is to say, the way I pray, the way I feel, the transcendent dimension of the human being in the, how to say that, in the passing rites, when someone was born, when we are married, when someone passed away. I mean, this cultural way of familiar religion and religious system. Religious system is a corporation. You need to follow what the Pope says or what the Bishop says. Well, in my opinion, what we create is precisely the first one. When you are alone by yourself and you need to pray, you are creating your own religion. And this is for me religion. The other thing is a religious system. So if we can separate so many dimensions, how can we say that this is a way of life? This is your way of life. I don't know if I did put it clearly.
We can also open the questions for the rest of the table if you want to address any question to Emilio regarding his speech.
Now most of political scientists and sociologists, usually they talk about multiple realities and multiple modernities, not only regarding to the context of today, but regarding to the context in the past. The modernity is a concept that emerged most likely at the 14th, 15th century and was developed in different waves, let's say. So how you see the multiple realities of multiple modernities in this context of Islam, but from these three approaches that you mentioned. Thank you.
I think that something to me may seem depicted in this way, and for you it can be absolutely the other way around. So I like the very concept of multiple realities. For me, religion is this, and for you is that. So my quibble is when we project a unique way of understanding religions, and we do it.
Yeah.
I have Christian colleagues that say, no, Christianity understood much better the sense of history. What's that? I mean,
Well, that means.
if you are smart, if you are clever, that's your advantage or your problem. But don't think that what you think, only because you don't know the other. Sometimes when I speak, even at home, about Islam, I find that, well, we've been joking about this. When, in Spain, everybody knows, everybody specializes in three things. Everybody knows everything about football, about politics, and about Islam. I've been studying Islam for the last 30 years, and when someone introduced myself, this man is a doctor in medicine, and this man is a doctor in Islamic studies. You know what happened? That the doctor in medicine is going to tell me, oh, you know what happened with Islam? The problem with Islam, and I never do it the other way around. I never say, you know which is the problem in medicine? No, I never do that. So the question is that we tend to understand the whole world from our private own vision. As they told me that my religion is the religion, as they told me that my religion is the only way I can behave, and I must be surrounded by people exactly like me, they project a very dangerous concept of the world, a very exclusive one. And the vaccine against this is the multiple realities.
Just to clarify a position about the dichotomy between the European integration and the potential Mediterranean integration. The reality is that Europe is an integrated body, it's a political body, it's an international legal recognized body, and the Mediterranean they don't have a unique voice in that, not because of Europe, but because of they don't have the integrated community that we hope. Integration is not an easy task. We see the problems in South America. We see now the American policy against treaties, against multicultural, multinational agreements. That is not, we cannot blame anybody for that. When Europe talks, it's because they have the capability to talk as an integrated body. Mediterranean, unfortunately, we are not. We are maybe in the very slow progress, but we hope we will achieve this point. Yes.
Refers to economic relations. What I focus more clearly in my work is about culture. Regarding the European Union, for instance, I guess you know that one day arose the debate of whether we need a European constitution or not.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, let's start by the forward. Let's define Europe. When you define things, is when you lose the concept, because nobody, based on these multiple realities, nobody agreed in a single definition. And they say, okay, Europe has a Judeo-Christian root. And some colleagues and myself signed a letter, an open letter to the European Union, saying, and also an Islamic one, based on what we've seen, and in thousands of similar examples. There is no philosophy in the Renaissance without even to find and Hayy Yafan, some books that connected the primitive Europe of the Middle Ages with the enlightened Arab world of those very times. Well, when we did address this letter to some European representatives, in fact, the European unique window in Madrid, they say, okay, don't worry about it, because we are not going to talk about the foreword of the Constitution, and we are not going to have a Constitution. What we understood is that if we want to include Islam in the definition of Europe, and in my opinion, this Islam is based on Islamic culture, they are going to refuse it. Because Europe nowadays has developed a sense of otherness regarding Islam. And what we must do is to integrate the past in order to let the Muslim communities of today in Europe, to let them know, as I said, that they are part of this history, that they didn't came in a UFO and they simply landed in Brussels. Because now we are creating the ghetto, the Islamic ghetto in Europe.
Okay, no Judeo-Christian legacy, no Islamic legacy. They were removed completely, but at the end, didn't work in any direction. You know that the president at that time was Giscard d'Estaing, the former Prime Minister of France. And well, they just decided to take the route of referendum. And what happened is a couple of countries which were very disappointed with the policies, and particularly in them, Denmark was one of them, they just voted no to the constitution. So the whole project was abandoned by the referendum of these two countries. We don't have a constitution so far. Just to finish the story, if you are not familiar with the process, the legal process of the Constitution of the European Union. Thank you.
I don't want to intervene too much, but I want to go back. I want to go back to something that I raised because it seems to me that, well, for me at least, it needs more explanation. And I want to know if you would say that Islam is the same in this way as Orthodox Judaism. If I come to, again, this Orthodox Judaism, the idea is that God gave He gave it to Moses, and it was then handed down by oral and written tradition, and no one can understand fully without what all of the major rabbis and theologians had said this message of God means. But that's God's word. So for a devout Orthodox Jew, that doesn't change. And if a person believes in a certain way, or if a person prays in a certain way, that doesn't change what God said the religion should be, and that should be the essence of Judaism, and that should be the essence even of Judaism fully and totally as society advances. which could be called an advance with modern developments or not. But that remains absolute. And so a person is not creating the religion or the faith at all. God created, God gave the word, God gave the commandments, God gave what should be followed. Now, therefore, I come back, well, if that is the case, and it doesn't matter what other people say. It doesn't matter what other people in the community may say. It doesn't matter what some other rabbis or theologians may say. This is the message, and it can be understood if one studies what the explanations have been. And that's what should be followed, and that's what is central. Now, my thought then is, well, doesn't this mean that for what I'm talking about in Judaism, people aren't creating the religion, God created it, and if that is the case in Orthodox Judaism, I'm not saying that's something I believe necessarily, but if that is the case in Orthodox Judaism, well, is the case in Islam different than that?
He's going to tell you exactly the same regarding our own religion. So they are those managers of the ways of salvation. They have a lot of power, and this power is based on their communication. And the highest level they impose to their ideas, the highest authority, the best for their purposes. I don't agree with that. I mean, I have a very good friend, Miguel Ángel Ayuso Goychol. He is a representative for the Muslim communities in the Vatican. He's living in Rome. So I don't know if he's now a bishop or not, or maybe he's got. Okay, we had a discussion about religion. We were talking about these kind of things, and then when we had dinner, he told me, Emilio, but I see that you don't believe that we have the truth. The whole truth, in capital letters. And I said, no, I don't have it. Okay, I love my mother, but I never say that she is the most beautiful woman in the world. But if someone tells me that his mother is more beautiful than mine, we are going to start bargaining. But I never proposed that. And that man told me, okay, what I do in Rome is to propose a dialogue, but they are on this side of the river, and I am in this side of the river, and the truth is with me. And I told him, okay, when I think about dialogue, I think about swimming in the river. So it's very different.
La notion de l'identification vers l'individualité, vous avez parlé du communautaire pour aller vers l'individuel. Okay. Comment est-ce que vous pouvez l'expliquer? Comment est-ce qu'on peut aller vers ça? Parce que il faudrait commencer par les mots, changer les mots. On parle toujours de communauté musulmane, etc. Changer le mot, est-ce que c'est possible de dire l'individu musulman? Pour changer le vocabulaire, pour arriver à l'individu. Ça me passionne de ne plus être une communauté, mais d'être un individu en moi-même, avec ma culture, avec ma religion, etc. Merci.
The community may be considered as your family name. I have a family name. By the way, my family name is very common, so I don't have this sense of privacy with my family name, because Gonzalez, there are millions. But if you project the idea that your community is your family name, you don't project a qualification of your community. Only the natural background for your individuality. And I think that religion is very important for education. I think that the sense of belonging to a community is very important for the self-development of the person. But identity is personal. Identity is not based in history. Identity is what I want to be. And the community leaders tend to think, no, identity is exactly to be inside this fence. And I don't agree with this. I think that from the early steps of literature, from Homer and the Iliad, the Odyssey, they are trying to escape from the very sense of closed identity, because identity is personal. I need horizon, I need to open. I am proud of being what I am. Let it be Christian, let it be Spanish, let it be part of my family. But I am not more than you. And I think this is very important. When we, I don't know, 50 or 60 years ago in Spain, everybody was absolutely convinced that Spain was the spiritual reserve of the world. Of the West. So nobody believes in God. Nobody is so honest as ourselves. I think this artificial sense of proud is a complex. We are no more than anyone else. I have my own vision of the world. I think that I am right. I am old enough to understand the world in a certain way. But how could I say that we all have to share this sense of vision of the world? So individuality is the final step to realize yourself in a society. I don't think I complicated more.
And I think it's a good point because you're talking about identity in a way that you were describing briefly with reference to this collective identity sense analogized to abstract expressionism, Pollock, and so forth. And I'm struck by this reference to abstract expressionist art as a model of collective identity. As many of us may know, abstract expressionism became a movement, an art movement, insofar as it was promoted back in the 1940s and 50s by the US government during the Cold War, Marshall Plan. It was part of this cultural imperialist effort. And it was funded by the US government, by intelligence, under the auspices of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Its ideological interpolation was that of kind of an individualistic, entrepreneurial, laissez-faire subjectivity. And extensive research has been done on this over the past several decades. Scholars across the spectrum have come to consensus on this as true fact. So by propounding this sort of modernist aesthetic model in a postmodern context, which you described, you cited Wittgenstein, for example, and you're talking about this sort of individual in contrast to a master narrativized subjectivity. Are you consciously rehearsing a Western cultural imperialist concept of a neoliberal Muslim subjectivity?
Well, I think this could mean labeling an idea that it has no label. You mentioned this American invention, but I should date back this very concept to a book written in Spain in Arabic by a man called Ibn Tufayl. And I think that individualism was born precisely in the novel Hayy ibn Yaqfan. Of course, in Arabic they say Al-Insan ibn Waqtihi. We are children of our time. And we tend to think that what we created in our time is brand new, but it's all based in old stories. Individualism has not a label. Individualism does not imply that I am a colonialistic or not. I went to Iran and I was dressed like this, and someone told me, excuse me, do you represent the colonialistic Europe by your tie? No, I only try to behave as they raised me. So they told me, if you are in a congress, you can wear a tie. If you want, I can remove it. So I am not representing something. I am not basing my thought in a certain way of thinking. When I said that I am a postmodern myself, it's simply because it's my time. I was raised in the university of the 80s, and the postmodernism was like this. I guess that Jackson Pollock, if he had been born in the Renaissance, I guess he'd never used this model. But for me, it's only how to say, a symbol. I am not representing anything. I don't believe in well, I say, the very sense of colonialism is no more than a narrative. Colonialism, I don't know if you know that book by Daniel Boyarin, The Task of Untranslation. If you project a concept in which meaning we agree today, and you project it to the past, you simply lose because you don't know exactly how it was loaded at those times. Colonialism is wrong. Colonialism is what we are doing right now, as Spaniards speaking in English in Morocco. So colonialism, I don't know. Colonialism is when my father told me something new and I said, no, you're colonizing my brain. So I think we always tend to separate worlds.
Any more questions?
Petite remarque par rapport à ce qu'a dit M. Martin à propos de comment on se représente une religion, comment on se représente notre religion. Est-ce qu'on crée notre propre religion ou bien il y a un corpus, le Coran ou la Torah, qui nous dicte comment être juif ou comment être musulman. Je pense que le drame dans la société musulmane actuelle, dans le monde musulman actuel, c'est justement ces divergences par rapport à comment être musulman. Est-ce qu'on est musulman tout simplement parce qu'on fait des rituels? Est-ce qu'on est musulman parce qu'on applique les valeurs sociales, de cohabitation, d'égalité, d'aller vers l'autre, etc. Et où est-ce qu'on est musulman parce qu'on applique un système politique qui est basé sur une certaine compréhension de l'islam. Et je pense que le monde musulman se libérera, je ne dirais pas se modernisera, parce que la modernité pose énormément de questions avec la post-modernité, la modernité liquide, etc. Mais le monde musulman avancera et se réconciliera avec lui-même lorsqu'il arrivera à trouver une façon de concilier justement entre le texte et la pratique. Et c'est ça ce qui nous manque dans le monde arabo-musulman en général.
That's what I asked about. What about Islam and what about, as you put it, the Muslim world? Well, you've given your answer to that in terms of what I had said and as an analogy.
I guess you all know Muhammad Abdul. Islam is only the Quran. So is your relationship with this message what may turn you into another person or not? The question is if you read the Quran or you let someone to explain to you the Quran. So you may have a direct implication in your own formative religious world or not. Normally nowadays we don't read the Quran. We let someone else to read it for us.
But everyone makes up their own mind about whether they're going to follow what they indeed believe the Quran says, and or if they're going to follow what various other people may interpret it as such, right? But the fact that they have their own belief doesn't mean that they are creating, that they, rather than God, is creating the religion. They can believe that God created this.
Yes. You know, this is a very old debate based on the relationship between Plato and Aristotle. I don't know if you know how they explain Plato and Aristotle to the children. They say, using the image of a horse, you say, okay, the horse, Plato says, the horse was created with 4 legs for running. And Aristotle said, okay, you know why the horse is running? Because he's got 4 legs. You find out the difference between cause and effect.
Yeah.
For Aristotle, you use nature. For Plato, nature was created. So if I say that I may create my own religion based on the holy book of the Quran or the Torah or the Gospel, it's going to work for me. If you think that this book was created by God, it's going to work for you. I mean, Plato and Aristotle are perfectly compatible between them. I must say, in my case, that I'm engaged in a translation of the Quran. I give Quran. I teach the Quran at the university. I read the Quran in Arabic, and I can't find in the Quran any idea contrary to my own vision of the world or my religion. So that's my problem, because I find out that my religion is in the Quran, but my religious system is my family name. So for me, it's compatible, but perhaps for others it is not. So I'm not trying to project my model as the unique one.
But wouldn't you say the issue is not so much what's good for you or for one person as opposed to another, but the issue is, if we're talking about the Quran, if we're talking about the Torah, the issue is, what is the truth? What is the truth? Not just for you, as one individual may decide you believe, but the issue really is, what is the truth? I mean, the people who argue that the truth is here because this is God's word, well, that's what they're saying. That's the truth.
Yeah, that's their truth. But if you write truth with capital letters, this is the problem.
No more questions? No. Okay, so we move on to the first panel. Yeah, I think that's the first time we have a schedule, so that's great. In this first panel, this first section, is going to be chaired by Norton Lefensky. The speaker is going to be Mr. Issam Saliba. He is an expert on Islamic law at the Law Library of Congress. And the title of his speech will be The Revival of Islamic Thoughts. You want?
Please. Do you need a computer?
You need a computer?
No, here.
Well,
That one way.
Who specializes in Islamic law and works for and does this for the Law Library of Congress. Now, in that capacity, he advises Congress and the executive branch of the United States government on a variety of high-level issues that are related to Islam. He's also been a speaker on Islamic law at different forums, including the International Judicial Conference, the Bar Association of Beirut, and the Bar Association of Washington, D.C. Since law is an essential part of the Islamic religion, as we know, Mr. Saliba brings to light some nuanced aspects of Islam, which you may hear about today, that he may be able to show us in his presentation.
And the Three Cultures Foundation and the International Council for Middle East Studies for inviting me to speak at this conference on Islam and modernity. Now, modernity may be described as the progress realized in Europe and in the West in general as a result of the emancipation of reason from the hegemony of the church. The opinions I express are mine and should not be attributed to the Library of Congress or any other U.S. government institution. The title of my presentation is Revival of Islamic Thought. And when I say revival of Islamic thought, I am proposing and accepting that there is something called Islamic thought. Now, what is Islamic thought? What I mean by Islamic thought is the process of acquiring knowledge that prevailed in the Arab Muslim world for centuries prior to the rise of modernity. The words Arab, Islam, and their derivatives are often used synonymously due to the role the Arabs played in the history of Islam. The Arabs conquered the ancient world under the banner of Islam, created an Islamic political order called the Caliphate, and caused Arabic to become the language of the political order thus created. Under the influence of Islam and the Arabic language, the indigenous peoples in the Middle East and North Africa became identified, and many of them identified themselves as Arabs. The Caliphate adopted a tradition of learning based on rational inquiry and free thinking, and did not impose religious teaching as the exclusive source of all knowledge. Now you may argue to the contrary that some other scholars did otherwise, but there is a trend that can be proven that the Caliphate adopted this tradition, or that this tradition is adopted by Islam. Free thinking and rational inquiry. The patronage of the Arab ruling elites provided material support, respect, and encouragement to use reason in the pursuit of the study of science to those with intellectual curiosity in the various disciplines of learning, irrespective of their religious persuasion or ethnic background, which is contrary completely to what we know about Islam today. In his book, History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, John Draper reports that the Saracen Empire, meaning the Arabic Empire, was dotted all over with colleges, and that, he continued saying, the superintendence of these schools was committed with noble liberality, sometimes to Nestorians, a group of Christians at the time, sometimes to Jews. It mattered not in what country a man was born, nor what were his religious opinions. Something for many today, in the Muslim world and abroad, looks completely untrue. But this is what the Draper said. Now, this tradition of learning is consistent with the teachings of Islam. And when I say a teaching of Islam, there is a teaching of Islam that is agreed upon, not just one individual or two. As Ibn Rushd explains in his treatise فصل المقال ما بين الشريعة والحكمة من اتصال, many verses in the Quran exhort people to ponder and reflect on the meaning of creation through the use of reason. It is reported in Sunan Abu Dawood that the Prophet Muhammad said, whoever takes a road for the pursuit of knowledge, God will take him on one of the roads of paradise. He also said, the learned people are the heirs of the Prophet. In his book, History of Physicians, Ibn Abi Usaybi'ah reports relates that when Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas fell ill in Mecca, the Prophet of God visited him and advised summoning Al-Haris ibn Qalada to his bedside because he, meaning the Haris ibn Qalada, was a medical practitioner. In other words, the Prophet of Islam advised reliance on medical science, not religion, for the cure of his companion. The scientific progress lasting several centuries in the Arab-Muslim world was due to the freedom of thought that scientists enjoyed in the pursuit of their research and investigation of natural phenomena. It has been reported that the Caliph al-Mansur devoted a lot of his time to astronomy and established schools for the study of medicine and other disciplines. And that under the caliphate of his grandson, Harun al-Rashid, each mosque was required to have a school attached to it. It is also well established that the commentaries on Aristotle written by Ibn Rushd were requested by Caliph Abu Yaqub of Spain. The internal wars within the Arab Muslim communities, and there was many of them, and their division into contending political powers and caliphates did not affect the growth and the progress of the study of science. When the Umayyad prevailed in Spain, and the Fatimids in Egypt, and the Abbasid in the rest of the state, all competed in supporting the art of learning. Among the many scientists who contributed to the rise of the Islamic Golden Age of inventions, progress, and scientific discoveries, suffice to mention the following three. Abu Ali Hassan ibn al-Haytham, known in the West as Al-Hazin, who was a scientist of many talents. He is described in a 2005 publication by the UNESCO as the founding of modern optics. And he is recognized as the one who successfully explained sight in terms of light traveling into the eye rather than the other way around. In 2009, an article in another UNESCO publication describes Al-Hazin as a man ahead of his time who determined the future of astronomy and whose discoveries made with the naked eye almost a millennium ago are confirmed by the Apollo 11 mission. 2. Ala ad-Din ibn al-Nafis, who is credited with discovering the pulmonary circulation of the blood and correcting the view of Galen, the famous renowned physician from the classical Greek era, by stating correctly that the blood must pass from the right ventricle to the left ventricle by way of the lungs. And 3. Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, a polymath who revolutionized the science of mathematics by adapting the use of the zero in the numbering system. His use of the Arabic word al-jabr in one of his treatises has given us the English word algebra, and his own name, al-Khwarizmi, gave us the English word algorithm. Now, the contributions of many other scientists were not less impressive. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, recent research has found that Copernicus used devices that had been developed by the Maraka astronomers Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, Muayyad al-Din al-Urdi, Qutb al-Din al-Shirazi, and Ibn al-Shatir. All of them are Muslim scientists of the 13th and 14th century. In Islamic thought, there was no conflict between religion and science. Islamic thought subscribed to the proposition that reason, not religion, is the source of scientific knowledge. This comports with Ibn Khaldun's view that natural sciences are sciences with which man can become acquainted through the very nature of his ability to think, and which can be studied by the people of all religious groups who are all equally qualified to learn them and to do research in them. Islamic thought used reason not only in the study of science, natural science, but also in the study of what we call religious sciences, ilm al-kalam, or discipline of theology, and ilm al-fiqh, or discipline of jurisprudence. Now, ilm al-kalam is by definition, as we read in Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, is a science that involves defending the articles of faith by offering evidence derived from reason. If we read about in the Encyclopedia Britannica about the Ash'ari school, which is the dominant school of theology in Islam, Encyclopedia Britannica described it as supporting the use of reason to defend the faith. And also they add that its followers, meaning the followers of the Ash'ari school, attempted to demonstrate the existence and nature of God through rational argument. In his book Al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali explains that there is no conflict between transmitted revelation and rational reasoning, and that adherence to literalism, this is the words of al-Ghazali, he's saying the adherence of literalism is the result of weak intellect and diminutive vision. This is al-Ghazali. Ghazali observes that there are matters which are knowable intuitively to man without proof, and matters that are not. He divides the matters not knowable intuitively into matters knowable only through rational proof, matters knowable only through revelation, and matters knowable through both rational proof and revelation. The important point is his conclusion, when he asserts that matters that reason determined to be impossible, as mentioned in Revelation, must be explained away allegorically or metaphorically. In other words, if whatever you read in the Quran, there is something evident by reason, that your reason came to a conclusion that is different from what you read in the Quran, then you must interpret what you read to be compatible and to fit what your reason has proven to be evidently true. So, in other words, matters knowable through revelation cannot, in his opinion, contradict what is determined to be conclusively evident by rational proof. Now, in the discipline of law, Muslim scholars relied on human reason in order to elucidate the legal rules of the divine law. In describing the role of reason in the discipline of fiqh, Imam al-Ghazali writes, "The most honorable knowledge is the one where reason and revelation conjoin, and where opinion and sharia coalesce, and the discipline of fiqh and its principles are of this kind." So he is praising the discipline of fiqh or the discipline of jurisprudence because it requires not only what the revelation tells you, provided the framework for its structural order. Another Western scholar, Hamilton Gibb, writes, "The jurists and theologians of the 2nd century elaborated a structure of law that is, from the point of view of logical perfection, one of the most brilliant essays of human reasoning. The process by which reason was used to elaborate the law is called ijtihad. And ijtihad is, by definition, the process of spending the utmost intellectual effort, the most thinking, to arrive at knowing what the divine law is. After centuries of flourishing discoveries, innovations, and progress, the Arab Muslim world turned away from its own rational tradition and gradually came to a complete state of stagnation and was unable to keep up with the demands necessitated by changing times and circumstances. A 2014 editorial in The Economist of London reads, "1,000 years ago, the great cities of Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo took turns to race ahead of the Western world. Islam and innovation were twins. The various Arab caliphates were dynastic superpowers, beacons of learning, tolerance, and trade. Yet today, the Arabs are in a wretched state." Close of quote. Now, some blame al-Ghazali for this decline, claiming that he downgraded or eliminated the use of reason as an essential part of Islamic thought. One of the Ghazali critics writes, "Ghazali believes that through religious mysticism, one can achieve a level of understanding different from rational truth. But a review of al-Ghazali's Al-Ghazali's book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, over which most of his critics complain, reveals a different picture. Al-Ghazali rejects some of the philosophers' doctrines, not because of their rational truth or rational argument. To the contrary, he criticizes them because they lack scientific certainty. In this respect, he writes, "If their metaphysical sciences, meaning if the philosophers' metaphysical sciences, were conclusively evident and free of speculation, as their mathematical sciences are, they wouldn't have disagreed on them since they didn't disagree on mathematics." In this book, Al-Ghazali clearly recognizes reason as the source of scientific knowledge. He gives the example of the eclipses of the sun and moon to confirm that the scientific explanation of these phenomena does not contradict religion, and that those who suggest otherwise offend religion and weaken it. In fact, the limited criticism of philosophy by al-Ghazali for lack of certainty is less severe than the general statement of René Descartes made 500 years later, in which he said, and I quote Descartes, philosophy has been pursued for many centuries by the best minds, and yet everything in it is still disputed and hence doubtful. In other words, the decline in the Arab-Muslim world was not the result of using Islamic thought, was not because of what Islamic thought is, but rather because the Arab-Muslim world stopped using reason in search of the truth. This has been most evident in the discipline of jurisprudence, where this stoppage of using reason acquired the name of Sadbab al-Ijtihad, or the closing of the door of interpretation of the Quran and the Revelation. The revival of Islamic thought to acquire and continually update knowledge through the use of reason is, in my opinion, a sure way for Arabs and Muslims to end the state of intellectual stagnation and embrace the achievements of modernity. In concluding, I shall note that the reasons why this has not happened yet in the Arab-Muslim world, embracing modernity and get out of this state of stagnation. The reason is not only because the scarcity of innovative thinkers and reform-minded scholars, the likes of Muhammad Abdu in Egypt and Muhammad Iqbal in Pakistan, but especially because the Arab-Muslim general public is still withholding its support from a return to the rationality of Islamic thought. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Isam, for such a wonderful speech. Emilio is going to make some comments on your
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear friend Isam. This has been a really thought-provoking speech. I particularly like very much the way you started by saying that indeed there is, or there was, but in any case there is Islamic thought. And there is a very celebrated book in Spanish, I'm afraid, about Islamic thought, in which his author, one of my colleagues in Spain, now he's retired, starts by saying, the Muslims also think and they write what they think. So it's a truism that people tend to think that is in existence, but it used to happen. It used to happen right now, and it used to happen throughout history.
What is the name of the book?
Islamic Thought, more contemporary Islamic Thought by André Azoulay. I like the way you said that free thinking and rational inquiry was the motor of Islamic thought. Indeed, it was the motor of what I call that Islamicate culture. This is precisely what gave the fuel, the combustible for that. You mentioned Ibn Rushd, Ibn al-Haytham, Ibn al-Nafis, al-Khwarizmi, al-Tusi. You mentioned also a report by the UNESCO in which, in a way, we or they acknowledge what we owe to these people. I don't know if the whole world knows that. So one of our tasks should be highlighting precisely this and let the people know that after Plato and Aristotle came Ibn Rushd, because we simply cut off this connectivity. Ibn Khaldun is an always useful references, and his idea of the metaphorical way of understanding what we read is absolutely necessary. I will go back to his work shortly afterwards. You mentioned also Joseph Chak and the rationality in Islamic thought. You mentioned also the collapse of Islamic thought, the decline, the closing of ijtihad, and at this point is where I'd like to highlight some ideas and pose some questions. First of all, it's almost a joke that I used to say to my students. I always say, do you know how do they say Chinese food in China? They say only food. Well, this is a very useful stupidity because we tend to think that Islamic thought is Islamic thought and Islamic thought is thought. Just like Islamic medicine is medicine and Islamic physics is physics. You mentioned this period of time in which after Muhammad Abdul and Muhammad Iqbal, it did start in a way that, well, they mentioned how it did start during, I guess, 15th century, the decline of classical Islamic thought and the renewal is needed. But I have my own opinion about this and just wanted to let you know about it, just to guess or to think what you think about it. In Spain, for instance, we have a very famous literary generation. We call that the generation of the 98. The 98 is the generation of the, we call it the regenerationism, we call it regeneracionismo, meaning the starting all over, the return of this, of, so to say, the Spanish self-pride. Why? Because during the 98, we simply lost Cuba. We lost Philippines. And why did we lose Philippines and Cuba? Because we had that war against the biggest brother of the world, the United States. So how can you say that you have a cultural problem when you have a war with the most powerful army of the world? It's simply that we tend to mix cultural declines and historical facts. In my opinion, and just wanted to know what you think about it, Ibn Khaldun, during the 14th century, is perfectly aware that their time is over. But for me, he's the most brilliant thinker of the Islamic world. So at that time, during the decline, he is capable to do so, to write. Why? Because he knows that Europe is coming. Why Europe is coming? Well, it's not for, how to say, for the decline and fall of Islamic thought. It's simply because Europe is gaining weight, is gaining strength. During the 15th century, 5 things took place regarding Islam. The first one is that the Turks took over Constantinople. The second is that the Castilians took over Granada. From then on, if you think about Islam, you think about the East. If you think about Christianity, you think about the West. Why? Because the last realm of Islam has been lost in the West, and the last realm of Christianity is lost in the East. So you tend to split the Mediterranean. The third thing is that the Portuguese circumvallated Africa. So Islamic trade is not needed anymore. They didn't do it bad. It's simply that someone did it better. Another thing is that we started, and I say we because it was the Castilian court who paid for it, we started the commerce with America. So the silver from America substituted in a way the gold from Africa. And the last, and for me most important thing, is that a man called Gutenberg created the first print. And what I write today can be read by thousands of people tomorrow. Islam didn't do anything bad. It's simply that someone did it better. Just like the Muslim thinkers of the Middle East, of the Middle Ages, did it better than the Greek. But it doesn't mean that the Greek had a problem. Aristotle and Plato do not represent a culture that after will fall into decline. A Muslim thinker you perfectly know, Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi was known by his nickname that was Al-Muallim Al-Thani. Al-Mu'allim al-Thani is the second master, the second teacher, because the first one was Aristotle. So Islam thought that they, as Islamic culture, they came from the Greeks. Why don't we think in Europe that we came from Islam? It's a narrative. Islam was perfectly aware of the narrative of connectivity with the past, but we were not. And this lack of continuity, this narrative of colonialism, and now I agree with you, this narrative of colonialism was inserted long afterwards in the Islamic thought, and they thought they did something bad. I wrote a book about Muhammad Abdul, and he's absolutely convinced that they did something wrong during the Middle Ages. They didn't do anything wrong. But there is a thinker, almost contemporary to Ibn Khaldun, called Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah offers an idea of we must close our identity. Well, if you close your identity, you lose your time, you lose the train. Because any culture, it is a culture in a symbiotic way. It is a culture because it's open. During the time of Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, you could learn everything, no matter its origin. But after Ibn Taymiyyah, they say, no, we are Muslims. And it means that we must close the door. This is the only culture. You close yourself. So for me, as I said, it's really, it has been really thought-provoking. It gave me a lot of ideas. So I owe to you my next book.
Well, as much as you said, I can say it back to you because your presentation was excellent. Our conversation last night was excellent with you. And you explained very well probably the reasons why the Islamic world, and I'm using the Arab Islamic word because of what I said, the reason of the stagnation that happened, probably they are responsible for it, or not, probably not. There is debate about that. But, and you mentioned Ibn Taymiyyah. With all what is being said about Ibn Taymiyyah today, and he's not being seen in a good light at all, I found that this is really not fair for him. Because Ibn Taymiyyah, if you read exactly not what he said in his fatwa, but in his book about reason, and I think I forgot the name now of the book, which is like 5 or 6 volumes. He defends the use of reason in Islam, and he's one of the great thinkers probably who defends the use of reason. I did not, in my presentation, to explain why this happened, why this stagnation happened. But the stagnation happened. And this situation that we are in today in Islam it makes you feel, as a scholar who knows this history, you feel sick in your stomach. Why is this happening? And what this is also causing, it's causing another problem which is very severe, that due to the free thinking that the Islamic thought offered, it was not all the same. There was some scholars who argued otherwise and who came very much on the fringes. And what's happening now, if these fringes are coming to be representing Islam. For example, when Daesh or these extremist groups are claiming that they are speaking in the name of Islam, it's not totally inaccurate, because they are referring to some writers and some scholars who said what they are saying. But this did not represent the Islamic thought. And this is when I say Islamic thought exists, meaning the majority of the thinkers of Islam is represented by what we call Islamic thought. But when, for example, Daesh is taking specific quotation from somewhere. It's not their invention. It exists. But this existence is a testament to the fact that the Muslims, in their time, the free thinking that they offered, allowed some contrary views to be written. So, yes, what you are explaining, why the Islamic world got to where we are now, probably I would agree with many of them, but this doesn't really relieve us as Arabs or non-Arabs from the responsibility of going back and correct. I'm not defending the colonialism, but the colonialism is not the real problem in my opinion. The problem is within the Arab Muslim community itself as well.
I don't want to unfocus because we're not talking about what I'm going to ask, but when you were referring that Islam thought is just thought, that I can agree more with that, or American Islam is the same thing. What about political Islam? It means that Islam can also be politics, because that's a very controversial issue.
Well, I think you may make the use you want of the word Islam, just like Islam was correctly arguing that Daesh speaks in the name of Islam. I can create an Islamic football team or a club or a music team. So, I mean, you may use the word in the sense you may want. It doesn't mean that it's the unique possibility. So, I don't know if you know that when you were mentioning this thing about Daesh, that the first edition of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, My Struggle, do they translate like My Struggle or My War? My Struggle, okay. In the first paragraph of the foreword is written, do not mix things. We are projecting a real Christian idea. So he's speaking in the name of Christianity. But I could say, as some demonstrators used to say after the terrorist attacks in Europe, don't do this in my name. I am part of this Christianity, but it is not your idea. So when you try to represent a whole world, that's why I think that the most important part is individuality. The other thing is, I'd like to highlight two ideas connected with your wise speech. The first one is about the interchange of books between Baghdad and Constantinople, around 850. When they were buying so many books written in Greek, the Greeks, I should say the Romans, because they were the Roman Empire, Byzantium, they created the lowercase in Greek. And why did they create it? The Greek was always written in capital letters. And in all of a sudden, they created the lowercase. Why? Because they were paying so much money for Greek masterpieces that if you were a good copyist, if you were good at copying documents, you could be a rich man. So they simply lived a Greek Renaissance. And in the interchange of letters that are published, at least I've seen it published in Spanish and French. I don't know, I'm absolutely sure that it has been also published in English. They start to laugh about each other. So the Romans say, and why do you want our Greeks? And the Arabs say, because you are Romans, we are the Greeks. So they say, so why do you think that the Greek heritage is yours? It is ours. Well, this connectivity is the most important part. If you feel yourself attached to the culture or to the extremes. There's a famous movie in French. I don't know, I can't remember now the name of the director. L'été au haram d'Archimède. Do you know that movie, L'été au haram d'Archimède, a French movie? This French movie, L'été au haram d'Archimède, in English, it could be the tea in Archimedes' harem. Well, it's about a boy, an immigrant from, I don't know, maybe Algeria or Morocco that goes to Paris and goes to the school. And the teacher say, okay, we are going to study mathematics. So write in the blackboard the Archimedes theorem of Archimedes. And that boy doesn't know what does theorem mean. And he understands that it's not theorem, but T or haram, the T in the haram. And he writes in the blackboard the T in Archimedes haram. So the whole classroom starts to laugh, and the teacher starts to laugh. He is the ignorant of the class. He's an Arab, he doesn't know anything about Greeks and so on. What this teacher does not know, is that Archimedes was known in Europe through the Arabic translations. So even those Arabs enlightened, they simply lose the connectivity. They feel that, they do not fill the gap between the Middle Ages and contemporary. History is about relays, just like those relays races, from the Greek to the Arabs, from the Arab to the Europeans. But a Muslim can be part of everything. So I think that our heritage is what we took from the past, not what we took from our wardrobe or a closet in my home.
Really surprised. For example, let us take the tradition, the Muslim tradition, which is everywhere. When you meet someone, what do you say as a Muslim? You say Assalamu alaikum, right? What does it mean, Assalamu alaikum? Peace be on you. Assalamu alaikum. And if the Muslim community was not really deeply committed to Assalam, how this would have been used, Assalamu alaikum, all over the Muslim world. And yet, today all what you hear is something about the violence. And as I said, I mean, there is some responsibility on us, and I consider myself, because I am an Arab, even though I am not a Muslim, but I am an Arab, I feel that there is a responsibility on us, regardless of what colonialism did, and they did bad things. We have some responsibility to wake up to these. Back to Ibn Taymiyyah. Do you know that Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a book about, there is a passage in the Quran that they are using it today very much, the extremists, to say that you have to kill all non-Muslims, right? Have you heard of this? Ibn Taymiyyah have written a book, complete book, to say, interpreting this verse, that this is only to those who are fighting you, not to everybody. Unless they are waging war on you, you don't have the right to attack them. And this is Ibn Taymiyyah. So there is a lot to be learned, I think, by all of us.
Par rapport à l'exposé de M. Hassan Selma, il me semble que nous avons dans le monde arabo-musulman une tendance à glorifier le passé, outre mesure, et à ne pas poser les vraies questions qui doivent nous interpeller en ce moment. Moi, quand j'ai entendu parler de la possibilité du renouveau de la pensée islamique, je m'attendais à avoir une analyse d'abord de ce que c'est que le renouveau par rapport à quoi, dans quel sens, et aussi quels sont les précurseurs de ce renouveau. Il y a il y a toute la tendance réformiste à Al-Azhar et tout ça en Égypte, qui a travaillé sur est-ce qu'il faut moderniser l'islam ou est-ce qu'il faut islamiser la modernité. C'était la grande question, à un moment où le monde arabe commençait à être envahi par le colonisateur. Bien sûr, on ne va pas tout mettre sur le dos de la colonisation, quoique il y a eu quand même une rupture. Il y a eu une rupture. C'est-à-dire que dans certains pays musulmans où il y avait une tendance vers ce renouveau justement de la pensée et le renouveau civilisationnel. Et depuis le début du 19e siècle, le début du 20e siècle, nous sommes en train de tâtonner, nous sommes en train de nous chercher. Il y a des penseurs, il y a des écrits, mais est-ce que ces pensées-là ont une influence sur le pouvoir politique? Parce que le politique joue un très grand rôle. Est-ce que nous avons dans nos sociétés un espace de liberté de la pensée qui puisse permettre justement de concrétiser ces idées et de les mettre en relation avec la réalité de ces sociétés. Malheureusement, je crois qu'il faut chercher aussi du côté, pas seulement du colonialisme, de la théorie du complot, ou l'apologie du passé, il faut chercher aussi du côté des pouvoirs politiques en place qui sont en quelque sorte souvent une entrave à l'avancée de la pensée et à la concrétisation de ces idées. Et c'est ce que je voulais dire.
My presentation, it doesn't say how to do it. What I am trying to say, that in the Islamic thought, there is nothing wrong with the Islamic thought, with the process. What is wrong that we left, that the Arab Muslim world left this process for whatever reason. How you revive it is a completely different question. I probably agree with you on some, disagree on others, but the essence that the Arab Muslim world has to realize is that there is nothing wrong with the thought itself, with the process of thought. In other words, there was nothing wrong with what Ghazali wrote. And in my opinion, there was nothing wrong with many of what Ibn Taymiyyah wrote. If we can read them correctly, and all what we need is to give the reason, the place it played in the past, not to glorify the past in its totality, but to know that if we had progressed in the past, it was because of the use of reason. And why didn't we stop progressing, in my opinion, is because we stopped using reason. And what Muhammad Abdu said, Muhammad Iqbal said, was exactly to revive the use of reason. And one interesting thing, if you have read what Muhammad Iqbal wrote, he not only blamed the politicians, but he complained about that his opinions that he's expressing is not going to be accepted to the multitude of Muslims in India. He said if we are trying, and he was talking about the Fatih Bab al-Ijtihad. He was not talking about, he said if we are going to say anything like that, the reaction of I'm rephrasing his words, but the reaction is going to be bad from the multitude of Muslims in India, because at the time there was no Pakistan when he was writing. So I think what you are raising is a proper question to raise, but it has nothing to do with, I think, or the focus of my presentation. But the focus of my presentation is that in the Islamic thought that we have, because we can define it, we can say this is what this scholar said, there is enough material, there is a process for advancement, for modernity, if we want to use it. We are not using it. Why and how? I will leave it up to somebody like you, who is well, I think, positioned to do such work, because this is an immense world of intellectual effort that is needed. Thank you.
More questions or comments? or we can close this this session. Yes, please.
Thank you. Je vais essayer de faire juste quelques remarques et commentaires sur ce que j'ai entendu. Je suis d'Essaouira, c'est l'introduction que je ferai. Et dans mon enfance et jeunesse aussi, j'ai vécu longtemps que musulman, de culture musulmane, d'origine de culture musulmane, que j'ai vécu avec des familles juives au Mellah. Le Mellah n'est pas un quartier de juifs, le Mellah c'est aussi un quartier de musulmans et de juifs. C'est plus ou moins, les familles sont plus ou moins modestes. Plus on avance dans la ville, on a l'emplacement, plus on a des gens un peu plus élevés sur le plan de leur pouvoir économique. Et donc, dans le Mellah même, avec ces familles juives, je ne peux pas parler de mode de vie de musulmans et mode de vie de juifs. Je ne peux que parler de mode de vie global de Marocains qui sont musulmans et juifs. Ceci pose pour moi cette question de cette séparation. Il y a une certaine rencontre dans l'entendement de la divinité, nuancée, séparée par les pratiques qui diffèrent, mais aussi en tenant compte aussi des nombres de prières à faire dans le jour, de ce qu'il faut manger, ce qu'il ne faut pas manger, et sur le plan global de la vie quotidienne, c'est un mode de vie global général que nous partagions, même dans le même bâtiment, dans le même étage même de la maison. Donc avec cette introduction, j'essaie de prendre note d'une chose. Tout d'abord, bien sûr, le titre de la rencontre, il n'y a pas une hypothèse ou une affirmation. Quand on dit islam et modernité, c'est-à-dire, il y a déjà un questionnement, où est-ce qu'on va? À ce moment-là, je commence par une impression personnelle, je peux me tromper, mais je vois un contraste entre M. Norton, le professeur Norton, et le professeur Emilio. Avec Emilio et M. Aïssa, on ressent cette passion de la civilisation musulmane, des recherches scientifiques, des pensées et tout, et qu'on est supposé retrouver dans l'islam, duquel on parle actuellement dans le monde. Alors que le professeur Norton, on retrouve ce questionnement pragmatique, où est-ce qu'on en est avec cela par rapport à ce qui se vit réellement au quotidien. C'est-à-dire ce que lui, il appelle un musulman dévoué irait à dire telle ou telle chose par rapport à ce qu'un chercheur ou un passionné de civilisation pose comme constat. C'est ce qui nous amène à nous demander, et ce que nous disons ici se partage avec tous les milieux sociaux musulmans, ou bien c'est uniquement une recherche intellectuelle dans laquelle nous cherchons encore une question de méthode ou de discours à faire parvenir à la situation qui nous intrigue tous et qui se passe dans le monde. Quand on dit islam et modernité, c'est comme si on dit, mais où est-ce qu'on en est avec cet islam actuellement dans le monde, avec tout ce qui se passe, et même des violences, des terrorismes et tout ça, et qu'on dit, ceci n'est pas l'islam. Mais en pause, on dit islam et le monde. Actuellement, dans le monde, quand on dit islam, oui, on trouve des gouvernements, des systèmes. Quand on dit christianisme, pas sûrement. Il y a toute une Europe et une Amérique qui fonctionnent comme ça, bien sûr avec des pratiques religieuses intimes, reliées, limitées, mais pas vraiment déclarées. Mais quand on dit islam, on parle de différents États. Quand on parle du judaïsme, on parle actuellement d'un État qui se veut hébreu et judaïque. Ceci, alors que dans le passé, donc je reviens à l'introduction, ce vécu d'islam et du judaïsme dans ces différents pays, dans le Maroc, mais aussi l'Algérie, la Tunisie, se réunissaient, se pratiquaient dans un même mode de vie. Ce que ont dit tous les professeurs, c'est vrai que la pensée musulmane, c'est aussi la pensée de tout le monde, dans le plan des sciences et des recherches. Tout comme la pensée chinoise, c'est aussi la pensée de l'humanité, tout comme la pensée d'Auguste Comte à côté de Ibn Khaldoun, c'est aussi une pensée qui est utile à tout ce monde.
We move to the next one. I think you're gonna chair.
Right
So,
now, or have a break? No,
Shall we have a break?
we should have a break.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, it's here.
Okay. So let's have a 10-15 minutes break.